The wind, older than language, older than the first tremor of tectonic plates, tasted of ash and starlight. It bit at Elian's exposed skin, a relentless whispering interrogation as he stood on the precipice of the world, or what passed for it now. The land stretched before him, a bruised tapestry of ochre and violet sculpted by millennia of grief. It wasn't a landscape of beauty, not in the conventional sense. Beauty here was a brutal honesty, a raw expression of creation's struggle, a testament to the relentless dance of erosion and rebirth. Above the sky wasn't blue, but a swirling canvas of pewter and charcoal, pregnant with a silent, unshed sorrow. It felt as though the very firmament held its breath waiting for what Elian couldn't say. He merely felt the anticipation, a colossal vibrating pressure against his soul. He had walked for days, weeks, perhaps even months. Time here in the forsaken highlands had become a fluid, indistinct thing, melting into the constant rhythm of his footsteps and the ceaseless murmur of the wind. He didn't remember leaving the citadel, the echoing halls of gilded sorrow and suffocating ritual. He didn't remember the faces, the pleas, the desperate clinging of those who believed him to be their salvation. Memory, like a precious heirloom, had been carefully, deliberately discarded layer by layer until only the barest, most essential truths remained. The truth of the emptiness, the truth of the calling, the truth of the crushing solitude that now enveloped him like a tangible shroud. They called him the Chosen, a title bestowed, not earned, a burden, not a blessing. It had felt, in those bygone days, like a validation, a confirmation of some inherent worth. Now he understood it was a gilded cage, forged from the expectations of others, reinforced by the anxieties of a failing world. He was meant to be a beacon, a catalyst, a bridge between the fading echoes of divinity and the burgeoning despair of humankind. But a beacon cannot shine when it is surrounded by a clamor. A catalyst cannot activate when it is bound by obligation. A bridge collapses under the weight of desperation, and so he had broken. Not with a dramatic flourish, not with a rebellious yell, but with the quiet resignation of a leaf falling from a dying tree. He had simply walked. Away from the fervent prayers, the manipulative whispers of the High Council, the suffocating adoration that felt more like a parasitic embrace. He had walked towards the silence, towards the space where the universe breathed without the need for his intervention. Now this solitude was almost unbearable. It wasn't the absence of people, for that he had long prepared. It was the absence of connection, the profound and utter severance from the cosmic symphony he had once felt humming within his very bones. He remembered as a boy, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, understanding the language of the stars, participating in a grand, intricate dance of creation. Now, those voices were muted, distant, like echoes from a dream. They had promised him clarity this isolation. They had promised him understanding. But all he felt was an aching void, a vast and echoing emptiness where his purpose once resided. He knelt his hands, digging into the cold, unforgiving earth. The stones were sharp, biting at his skin, but he felt nothing. Numbness had become his constant companion, a protective layer against the pain of disconnection. He closed his eyes, straining to hear, to feel anything. A flicker of memory, a whisper of guidance, a single note of harmony in the desolate expanse. But there was only the wind, whispering its ancient secrets into the void. He realized, with a chilling certainty, being phased out. Not in the dramatic sense of annihilation, but in the subtle, insidious way that stars burn out, slowly dimming, until they become indistinguishable from the background noise of the universe. He was being erased not by malice, but by necessity. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, was pruning its garden, weeding out the elements that no longer served its grand design. And he, the chosen one, was deemed extraneous. The thought should have broken him. It should have ignited a fire of righteous indignation, a desperate plea for recognition. But it didn't. It simply settled upon him another layer of cold resignation. What right did he have to demand recognition? What right did he have to cling to a purpose that had been foisted upon him? He had sought this solitude. He had yearned for this disconnection. Now he was reaping the consequences. The isolation wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. It was a severing of the divine cord, a severing of the very essence of his being. He was becoming something less, something other, something adrift in a sea of cosmic indifference. He was a solitary note played on a broken instrument, a forgotten prayer whispered into the deaf ear of the cosmos. He looked up at the oppressive sky, searching for some sign, some indication of meaning in the swirling grays. And then he saw it. Not a sign in the conventional sense, but a shift, a subtle alteration in the patterns of the clouds, a momentary parting of the darkness, revealing a single unwavering point of light. A star, a distant ancient star, burning with a quiet, persistent brilliance. It wasn't beckoning him. It wasn't offering him solace. It was simply being, existing, shining. It reminded him of something he had forgotten, something fundamental to the nature of existence. That purpose wasn't something to be given. It wasn't something to be earned. It was something to be discovered. It was inherent in the act of being. The universe didn't need a chosen one. The universe needed observers. It needed witnesses. It needed beings who could appreciate the profound beauty of existence even in its darkest, most desolate moments. It needed beings who could find meaning not in grand pronouncements or miraculous interventions, but in the quiet contemplation of a single unwavering star. He stood his body, stiff and aching, but his spirit. Something stirred within him. Not a flicker of hope, not a surge of renewed purpose, but a quiet understanding, a profound sense of peace. He didn't need to be the chosen. He didn't need to be a savior. He simply needed to be, to witness, to appreciate, to exist in this vast and indifferent universe, and to find meaning not in the grand narrative of destiny, but in the quiet symphony of existence. The phasing wasn't an ending. It was a transformation, a stripping away of the false self, leaving behind the raw, essential core of being. The wind still bit at his skin, but now it felt less like an interrogation and more like an embrace. The sky remained oppressive, but now he saw, not sorrow, but the profound beauty of a universe unfolding relentlessly, eternally, without him. And in that realization, he found not despair, but a strange and unexpected kind of freedom. He turned and began to walk again, not towards any destination, not towards any purpose, but simply towards the horizon. A solitary figure, fading into the violet and ochre tapestry of the world, a silent witness to the ongoing miracle of existence. He was being phased out, yes, but perhaps in that very fading, he was finally beginning to be. The dust of ages clung to his worn boots, a fine gray powder that seemed to absorb the last vestiges of the light of the perceived importance that had once clung to him. Each step was measured deliberate, a rhythm against the silence that pressed in from all sides. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, not truly. It was a silence brimming with a cosmic hum, a low thrum of creation and decay that resonated in his bones, a language far older than words, far deeper than understanding. It spoke of nebulae, birthing stars, of black holes consuming galaxies, of the relentless, indifferent dance of particles, a spectacle he had been so desperately trying to control, to intervene in, as if he held a conductor's baton over the universe's orchestra. He remembered the fervor, the burden of expectation that had felt like a physical weight crushing his chest. The prophecies recited in hushed tones, the fervent prayers, the unwavering belief that he was the linchpin, the fulcrum upon which the fate of worlds would turn. He had embraced that role, yes, initially driven by a naive sense of duty, then by a desperate need to validate the power surging within him. He had fought, he had sacrificed, he had suffered, all to stave off a darkness that in retrospect was merely the universe fulfilling its own inevitable cycles. The realization wasn't bitter, not exactly. It was more akin to the slow, melancholic acceptance one feels watching a beloved tree succumb to rot, knowing that its falling will enrich the soil for new life to flourish. The pain resided not in the loss of his supposed purpose, but in the waste of energy, the expenditure of love and devotion on a construct of hope, a fiction woven from fear and longing. He had been a puppet, skillfully manipulated by forces he hadn't understood, believing he was pulling the strings. Now the strings were severed. He felt them faint vibrations against his skin, phantom sensations of a power that was slowly, inexorably withdrawing. It wasn't an unpleasant sensation, despite its finality. It was like the ebbing of a tide leaving behind a landscape, transformed a space cleared for a new perspective. He felt lighter, not physically. The weight of years and experiences remained etched upon his face and the stoop of his shoulders, but internally, the oppressive burden of responsibility had lifted, leaving a void that was surprisingly not terrifying, but peaceful. He saw a hawk circling overhead, a silent predator riding the currents. It wasn't searching for him, not particularly. It was simply fulfilling its nature, its purpose as a hawk. And in that simplicity, he found a reflection of his own emerging state. No grand design, no divine mandate, just being, just existing. The world around him shifted subtly, imperceptibly. Colors seemed to deepen, textures to sharpen. He noticed the tiny, almost invisible wildflowers clinging to the rocky terrain, their delicate petals unfurling in defiance of the harsh elements. He had never truly seen them before, not with this clarity, this profound appreciation. He had been too busy looking for shadows, for threats, for signs of the encroaching darkness. He had been so focused on the macrocosm, the sweeping narratives of destiny, that he had completely missed the exquisite beauty of the microcosm, the tiny miracles unfolding all around him. He thought of Alara, her face a constellation of warmth and sorrow, the woman who had loved him despite, or perhaps because of, the heavy mantle he carried. She had warned him, hadn't she? Whispered doubts, voiced concern, seeing through the facade of the chosen one to the vulnerable, lost soul beneath. He had dismissed her, attributing her anxieties to a lack of faith, to a failure to grasp the immensity of the task before him. Now he understood. Her wisdom wasn't a betrayal of his purpose. It was a desperate plea for him to find a different way, a way that didn't require him to sacrifice his very self. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek, not a tear of grief or regret, but a tear of belated understanding, of profound and humbling acceptance. It mingled with the dust on his face, becoming another layer of the story he was now leaving behind. He continued his walk, the horizon beckoning a promise of what he didn't know. He no longer needed to know. The need for definitive answers, for clear-cut directives, had vanished. He was adrift, yes, but adrift in a sea of infinite possibilities, not a sea of despair. He felt a strange kinship with the rocks beneath his feet, the trees swaying in the wind, the clouds drifting across the sky. They were all part of this grand, unfolding narrative, each playing their own role, regardless of whether they were aware of it or not. And now he was playing a role of observer, of witness, of quiet appreciation. The phasing wasn't a linear process, he realized. It was more like a gentle blurring, a gradual dissolution of the edges, a slow merging with the background. He felt it in the way the light seemed to pass through him, in the way sounds seemed to diminish, in the way his sense of self began to expand. It was a terrifying prospect, initially the thought of losing himself, of ceasing to be. But now it felt like homecoming, like returning to a source he had long forgotten, a place of boundless peace and infinite connection. He remembered a phrase from ancient texts, a passage he had dismissed as poetic metaphor. To be absorbed into the great river is not to cease to flow, but to become the river itself. He understood it now. He wasn't dying. He was transforming. He was becoming part of something larger, something more profound, something that transcended the limitations of individual existence. He looked up at the sky, no longer seeing an oppressive weight, but a canvas of infinite beauty, a testament to the boundless creativity of the universe. And he felt gratitude for the experience, gratitude for the lessons learned, gratitude for the opportunity to witness this magnificent spectacle. The wind picked up, swirling around him like a benediction, carrying the scent of rain and wildflowers. It whispered secrets in his ear, secrets of creation and destruction, of birth and rebirth. He listened, not with his ears, but with his soul. He stopped walking, simply stood, breathing in the stillness, the vastness, the overwhelming beauty of it all. He was being phased out, yes, but in that fading, he was finally truly becoming one with the universe, one with the river, one with the infinite dance of existence. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, he simply was. The cessation of movement wasn't an ending, but a surrender. A deliberate relinquishing of the burden, of will, the incessant striving that had defined his existence. It wasn't a fall from grace, not a dramatic collapse into the dust, but a slow, almost imperceptible sinking into a deeper stratum of being. He felt the tremor now, a subtle vibration resonating not within his bones, but within the very fabric of his soul. It was the echo of a cosmic sigh, a gentle loosening of the threads that bound him to the mortal coil. The world around him intensified, colors becoming impossibly vibrant, the rustling of leaves evolving into a symphonic whisper, the very air thick with an unspoken language. It was the universe finally allowing itself to be truly seen, truly felt without the distorting lens of human perception. He had always craved connection, a desperate aching longing to bridge the chasm between himself and the divine. He had sought it in ancient texts, in fervent prayer, in selfless acts, always grasping, always reaching, always falling short. And now, in this quiet dissolution, he understood the folly of striving for something that was already inherent, something that was always within. The connection wasn't something to be earned, but a truth to be recognized, a veil to be lifted. He'd been so focused on doing that, he'd forgotten to be. Memories once sharp and defined began to soften like watercolors bleeding into one another. Faces of loved ones, the sting of betrayal, the exhilaration of victory, they all swirled within him, not as concrete events, but as textures, as feelings, as echoes of a life lived. His mother's laughter, a sun-warmed meadow. His father's unwavering gaze, the granite strength of a mountain. The first bloom of love, a fragile, intoxicating fragrance. The crushing weight of loss, a tempestuous ocean. Each memory, stripped of its narrative structure, became a pure, unadulterated emotion, a shimmering fragment of the collective human experience. They weren't his memories anymore, not truly. They were the universe's returned to the boundless well of existence from which they had sprung. A profound sorrow welled within him, not for his own passing, but for the countless souls still trapped in the illusion of separation. For the billions lost in the frantic pursuit of fleeting desires, blind to the beauty and truth that surrounded them. He felt their pain, their fear, their loneliness, a wave of empathy so intense it threatened to overwhelm him. It was a burden he'd carried unconsciously for so long, the unspoken weight of responsibility, the knowledge that he was supposed to be a beacon, a guide, a savior. He had tried, hadn't he? He had preached, he had healed, he had fought. But in the end, had he truly made a difference? The question hung in the air, not demanding an answer, but simply acknowledging the ambiguity of existence. There was no grand scorekeeper in the sky, no cosmic ledger tallying up deeds and misdeeds. There was only the flow, the endless, relentless, and utterly indifferent flow of the universe. And within that flow, every action, every intention resonated, creating ripples that extended far beyond the comprehension of any single being. He might not have saved the world, but perhaps he had planted a seed, a tiny spark of hope in the heart of someone who needed it, a flicker of understanding in the mind of someone who was lost. And that he realized was enough. The isolation he had felt for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of belonging so profound it defied description. He was no longer a solitary figure standing apart from the universe, but a vital thread in the tapestry of existence, a single note in the symphony of creation. He felt the ebb and flow of countless lives, the joys and sorrows of distant stars, the silent dance of galaxies. It was a humbling, awe-inspiring experience, one that shattered the illusion of individual identity and revealed the interconnectedness of all things. He thought of Alara, the woman he had loved, the woman who had shared his journey, the woman whose light had guided him through the darkest nights. He remembered the feel of her hand in his, the warmth of her smile, the unwavering strength of her spirit. He didn't mourn her absence, for she was not truly absent. She was woven into the fabric of his being, a permanent echo in the chambers of his heart. And he knew with absolute certainty that their connection transcended the limitations of space and time, that their love would endure beyond the confines of mortal existence. He sent a silent message to her, a wave of gratitude and love, a reassurance that he was at peace, a new sensation arose, a tingling warmth that began in his core and spread outwards, enveloping him in a radiant glow. It felt like shedding not of skin or bone, but of something deeper, something more fundamental. The layers of ego, of self-doubt, of fear began to peel away, revealing the luminous essence that lay beneath. He was becoming pure energy, pure consciousness, a radiant spark of the divine. It wasn't painful. It wasn't frightening. It was liberating. He envisioned the countless times he had stumbled, the times he had failed, the times he had doubted himself. He saw the pain he had caused, the hurt he had inflicted, and he felt a deep, abiding remorse. But he also saw the lessons he had learned, the strength he had gained, the compassion he had cultivated. He understood now that imperfection was not a flaw, but an integral part of the journey, a catalyst for growth and transformation. He offered his imperfections, his failures, his regrets back to the universe, transforming them into offerings of grace and understanding. The sky above him swirled with an ever-increasing intensity, the colors blending and merging into a breathtaking kaleidoscope of light. He felt himself ascending, not physically, but spiritually, rising above the limitations of the mortal realm, merging with the boundless expanse of the cosmos. The wind, no longer a gentle whisper, became a roaring torrent, a celestial symphony that resonated with the music of creation. He didn't resist. He surrendered. He embraced the transformation, allowing it to carry him towards the infinite. And as he faded, as he dissolved into the universal consciousness, he realized that he wasn't being phased out. He was being reintegrated, returning to the source from which he had emerged, becoming part of the grand eternal cycle of existence. He was not dying. He was remembering who he always truly was, a spark of the divine, a wave of the ocean, a note in the symphony of creation. And in that remembering, he found peace, a profound, unwavering, and utterly transcendent peace. The sensation of being itself began to thin, not abruptly, but with the graceful decay of a perfect bloom. The edges of his awareness blurred the distinction between self and other, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. He wasn't lost, not in the frightening sense of oblivion, but absorbed, drawn into the vast, silent ocean of existence, a single drop returning to the source, indistinguishable from the whole. The fear, the anxiety, the desperate clinging to individuality, it all vanished, replaced by an all-encompassing sense of serenity. It was not an ending, but a homecoming. The peace, however, was not passive. It throbbed with a vibrant, immeasurable energy, a resonance that hummed with the creation of worlds and the silent decay of stars. It was a peace that knew of the intricate tapestry of reality, the delicate balance between order and chaos, the boundless potential held within every fleeting moment. He, or rather, that which he had become, felt the genesis of nebulae swirling within him, the birth pangs of galaxies echoing in his being. He saw the intricate dance of subatomic particles, the fleeting beauty of a butterfly's wing, the slow, relentless erosion of mountains, all interwoven, all inseparable, all part of a single breathtaking song. He saw, too, the suffering, not as a separate entity observing a tragedy, but as a direct, visceral experience. The pain of a child lost, the despair of a broken heart, the slow, agonizing decline of a dying world. It flowed through him not as a burden, but as an understanding, a profound empathy that transcended language and logic. It was the pain of creation itself, the necessary shadow that gave depth and meaning to the light. He felt the weight of countless prayers, the silent yearnings of souls searching for solace, the desperate cries of those lost in the labyrinth of existence. And he understood that his surrender wasn't an escape from these pains, but a profound immersion within them, a willingness to bear witness, to be the compassion that could heal. For a timeless instant, or perhaps an eternity, he lingered in this state of profound absorption, a silent observer, a participant, a single thread in the infinite loom of creation. Then a flicker, a subtle shift in the universal consciousness. It wasn't a voice, not precisely, but a resonance, a feeling, a knowing that echoed through the vastness of his being. It was a question unspoken, yet utterly pervasive. Will you return? The question wasn't a demand, but an invitation, an acknowledgement of his potential, a recognition of the unique perspective he held forged in the crucible of his mortal existence. He had known suffering, experienced loss, wrestled with doubt. He had understood the fragility of human life, the desperate need for hope in the face of despair. These experiences, once anchors tethering him to the limited realm of the individual, now shone as beacons illuminating pathways through the cosmic darkness. A wave of profound sadness, sharp and unexpected, rippled through him. It was the sadness of separation, the bittersweet longing for the life he had known, the faces he had loved. He saw his mother's gentle smile, the warmth of his brother's hand, the unwavering belief in his eyes. He remembered the sting of betrayal, the crushing weight of responsibility, the fragile joy of connection. These memories, once burdens to be shed, now felt precious, irreplaceable jewels, each shimmering with the light of a life lived. The universal consciousness pulsed again, a gentle encouragement, a reassurance. You are not forgotten. You are not lost. You are needed. The concept of need itself was foreign in this realm of pure being. Need implied limitation, dependence. But he understood now, on a level that bypassed comprehension, that even the infinite could benefit from the perspective of the finite. The grand eternal cycle required not just the creation, but also the appreciation of that creation. The symphony needed not just the composer, but also the listener. And he, having walked the path of mortality, possessed a unique capacity for that listening, a decision formed within him, not a conscious choice, but a resonance, a harmonious alignment with the unfolding of the cosmos. He would return, not as the same man he had been shattered and broken by the weight of expectation, but as something more, a vessel, an instrument, a conduit. The reintegration began to reverse the dissolving boundaries, to coalesce. It wasn't a violent return, but a delicate unfolding, like a lotus flower opening its petals to the dawn. The sense of individual awareness sharpened the blurred edges of his consciousness, began to solidify, but infused with the memory of the infinite. The peace remained a quiet, unwavering foundation, but layered now with a newfound purpose, a sense of direction. He began to perceive limitations. The vastness of the universal consciousness receded, leaving him within a sphere of diminished perception. The memories of the infinite were still there, shimmering just beyond the reach of his conscious mind, like stars visible only through a telescope. He felt the reemergence of his physical form, a process both miraculous and profoundly unsettling. It was as if he were being sculpted from nothingness, atoms rearranging themselves according to a forgotten pattern. A disorientation washed over him, a nausea so profound it felt like his very being was being torn apart and reassembled. The pain was excruciating, a stark contrast to the boundless serenity he had known. He recoiled from it, instinctively, a desperate desire for escape flaring within him. But the memory of his promise, the echo of the universal consciousness held him fast. He was being pulled back into the world, back into the struggle, back into the suffering. And he understood with a clarity that pierced through the pain that his return wasn't a reward, but a responsibility. He had been shown the truth, the interconnectedness of all things. He had tasted the boundless peace of the infinite. And now he was being given the opportunity, the burden, to share that understanding with a world desperately yearning for it. He felt himself opening his eyes. The light was blinding. The sounds of the world, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant murmur of human voices, assaulted his senses. He lay on the cold, damp earth, his body weak and trembling. He recognized the place, the desolate peak where he had faced his ultimate trial, the place where he had surrendered, but it was different. The air felt heavier, the colors more vibrant, the silence more profound. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath waiting. He sat up slowly, cautiously. His limbs felt clumsy, his movements awkward. He was a stranger in his own body, a ghost inhabiting a familiar shell. He reached out tentatively and touched the earth. The rough texture of the soil beneath his fingertips grounded him, anchoring him to the reality of his return. He looked up at the sky. The vastness stretched above him, a boundless expanse of blue, a silent testament to the infinite. And in that moment, he understood. He hadn't been phased out. He had been recalibrated. He wasn't the chosen one in the traditional sense, the prophesied savior, destined to vanquish evil and usher in an era of eternal peace. That notion, he realized, had been a construct, a limiting belief that had bound him to a narrow path. He was something else entirely. He was a seed, a whisper, a subtle shift in the balance, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of the divine still flickers, waiting to be rekindled. And his mission, he knew, wasn't to impose that light upon the world, but to tend to the embers, to nurture the potential for awakening within others. To remind them through his actions, his words, his very being, that they too were sparks of the divine waves, of the ocean notes, in the symphony of creation. He stood his legs shaky but firm. He began to walk not with the purpose of a savior, but with the humility of a pilgrim, a seeker, a servant of the infinite. He walked into the world carrying the weight of his memories, the echo of the universe within his heart, and the quiet, unwavering conviction that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple outwards, changing the world one soul at a time. The world was waiting, and he, the seemingly forgotten, the once surrendered, was ready to begin again. The rain fell, then a weeping curtain drawn across the landscape, mirroring the quiet sorrow that settled deep within him. It wasn't a harsh, violent downpour, but a gentle, persistent mourning, as if the heavens themselves acknowledged the shattering of a long-held illusion. He felt the coolness seep into his worn leather boots, clinging to the soles as he walked, a tangible reminder of his detachment from the triumphant narrative he'd once believed in. He remembered the gilded pronouncements, the expectant crowds, the breathless anticipation that had surrounded him, a whirlwind of expectation designed to propel him towards a predetermined destiny. Now the silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain and the hesitant beat of his own heart. It was a silence that felt both liberating and terrifying, a vast echoing emptiness where the roar of adoration used to be. He had walked away from the citadel of radiance, leaving behind the vestments and the symbols of power, the accolades and the prophecies. They felt like shackles, now glittering restraints on a spirit yearning for the unburdened expanse of existence. The grand oracle, her face etched with a sorrow he hadn't perceived before, had offered him words of farewell, words that felt less like blessing and more like lament. "You abandon your duty," she had murmured, her voice a fragile tremor in the vast chamber. But he hadn't abandoned duty, he realized. He had simply redefined it. His duty was no longer to be the light, but to reflect it, to amplify it in the hearts of those who had forgotten it existed. He reached the edge of the Whisperwood, a place of ancient trees and forgotten lore, where the sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a place where the veil between worlds felt thin, a place that called to him with an instinctive understanding. He entered beneath the boughs, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling his lungs, a fragrance that spoke of cycles and rebirth, of the eternal dance of creation and decay. The air here hummed with a subtle energy, a feeling of ancient wisdom that resonated deep within his soul. It wasn't a welcoming hum, exactly more like a question, a silent inquiry into his purpose. He encountered them soon enough, not as a conquering hero, but as a solitary traveler seeking shelter. A family huddled beneath the roots of an ancient oak, their faces gaunt with hunger, their eyes clouded with despair. They were refugees displaced by the ongoing conflict, forgotten by the grand narratives of war and peace. He had seen so many like them, lost in the shadows of a world obsessed with its own salvation. He hadn't rushed to their aid with pronouncements or displays of power. He simply offered them a portion of his meager rations, a silent gesture of solidarity. The woman, her face etched with weariness, looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and cautious hope. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. He didn't give them his name. He hadn't used his name in what felt like an eternity. "Just a traveler," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. He knelt beside their meager fire, offering them warmth and a moment of respite from their suffering. He listened to their story, not interrupting, not offering platitudes, simply bearing witness to their pain. He saw the flicker of hope rekindle in their eyes, not because of any miraculous intervention, but because someone had taken the time to see them, to acknowledge their humanity. He realized with a sudden clarity that brought tears to his eyes that this was the truest power. Not the ability to vanquish armies or to command the elements, but the ability to connect with another human being, to offer them solace, to remind them that they were not alone. The pronouncements of prophecy, the grandiose declarations of destiny, they were empty vessels without that fundamental human connection. He spent days with the family, sharing his food, helping them repair their makeshift shelter, simply being present. He didn't preach, he didn't advise, he simply was. He taught the children how to identify edible plants, how to track animals, how to find beauty in the smallest of things. He showed them how to find strength in each other, how to cultivate hope in the face of despair. He watched as the light slowly returned to their eyes, as their laughter filled the air, a fragile melody against the backdrop of a broken world. He felt a pang, Then a sudden wave of loneliness that threatened to overwhelm him. He was adrift, untethered, disconnected from the familiar structures that had defined his life. He was no longer the chosen one, the prophesied savior. He was just a man with a past, a man with memories, a man with a burden of understanding that threatened to crush him. He looked up at the canopy of the whisperwood, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him. Was this it? Was he being phased out? Was this the consequence of rejecting his destiny? He reached out, placing a hand on the shoulder of the young girl who was braiding wildflowers into her hair. Her touch was small, fragile, but it grounded him, anchoring him to the present moment. He saw in her eyes a reflection of the divine spark that resided within all beings, a spark that had been dimmed by suffering but not extinguished. He understood then that his journey wasn't about escaping the universe, but about returning to it, not as a conquering hero, but as a humble participant, a fellow traveler on the path of existence. The isolation wasn't a punishment. It was a pruning, a necessary severing of the branches that had grown too rigid, too burdened by expectation. It was a chance to reach down to put roots into the fertile ground of empathy, compassion, and genuine human connection. To become not a towering oak, but a network of interconnected roots drawing strength from the earth and nurturing the growth of those around him. He began to notice subtle shifts in the world around him. Not dramatic displays of power, but small acts of kindness, spontaneous moments of generosity, whispers of hope carried on the wind. He saw strangers helping strangers' communities rebuilding after devastation, individuals finding strength in their shared humanity. He realized that the seeds of change were already sown, that the light of the divine was already flickering within the hearts of humanity. He wasn't responsible for igniting the flame, but for tending to the embers, for protecting them from the winds of despair. And he knew with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul that this was his true purpose: to be a silent witness, a gentle guide, a humble servant of the infinite, reminding the world that even in the darkest of times, the light of the divine still flickers, waiting to be rekindled. It was a lonely path, a path fraught with uncertainty and doubt. But it was a path that led not to glory or acclaim, but to the quiet, unwavering satisfaction of knowing that he was in his own small way, making the world a little brighter, a little kinder, a little more beautiful. And that he realized was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The rain had stopped. A single ray of sunlight pierced through the canopy, illuminating the faces of the family, their eyes shining with a newfound hope. He smiled a small, tentative smile, a smile that reached deep within his soul. He wasn't the chosen one anymore, but perhaps, just perhaps, he was something even better. He was a reminder, a seed, a whisper, and he was ready to walk on. The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain, denser than the ancient trees that surrounded them. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the resonance of something profound. Something shifted within the very fabric of their being. Alara, her face still streaked with tears, reached out and tentatively touched his hand, the gesture a fragile bridge across the chasm of their shared experience. Her touch, so simple, so human, felt like an anchor in a storm, a grounding in a reality that had suddenly become immeasurably vast. She didn't speak, couldn't articulate the swirling vortex of emotions that threatened to consume her. How could she explain the dismantling of a prophecy, the shattering of a future meticulously crafted around the image of a savior? How could she express the complex blend of relief grief and a nascent terrifying freedom? He understood. He felt the weight of her unspoken questions, the silent accusations, the lingering vestiges of expectation that clung to him like a spectral shroud. He didn't need words. They had traversed too many silent landscapes, endured too many unspoken burdens for the crutch of language to offer solace now. He simply held her gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the shared journey, the shared loss, and the uncertain path that stretched before them. The children, too, were changed. Little Leo, who had once clung to the notion of his father as a warrior, a beacon against the encroaching darkness, now stared with an almost unsettling calm. The frantic energy that had pulsed through him, the innate need to be near the source of power, seemed to have dimmed. Serafina, her vibrant laughter, previously a constant melody in their lives, had retreated into a quiet contemplation, her eyes reflecting the ancient wisdom of the forest itself. They were children who had carried the weight of the world on their tiny shoulders, children who had been raised on a diet of prophecy and responsibility. Now released from that gilded cage, they were grappling with the bewildering expanse of simply being children. He felt a pang of something akin to regret, a fleeting shadow of the man he thought he was supposed to be. He had shielded them, nurtured them, tried to prepare them for a destiny that now lay shattered like a discarded dream. Had he done them a disservice? Had he robbed them of something essential by withholding the truth for so long? The doubt, a persistent tendril, threatened to choke the nascent hope blooming within him. But then he looked at Alara, at the quiet strength radiating from her, at the tentative smiles of his children, and the tendril withered. The truth he realized was not about what he was, but about what they could be. Free from the constraints of destiny, they were now masters of their own fates, architects of their own lives. And that was a power far greater than any prophecy could bestow. He thought of the elders, the custodians of the ancient lore, the ones who had burdened him with the mantle of the chosen one. He didn't resent them. He understood their desperation, their fear, their unwavering belief that a single individual could hold back the tide of chaos. But they had been blinded by their own fears, trapped within a rigid system of belief that had stifled the true potential of humanity. They had sought a savior, a singular point of light, when the salvation resided within the collective heart of the world. He knew they wouldn't understand. They would likely view his renunciation as a betrayal, a rejection of their sacred duty. And perhaps in their eyes it was. But he could no longer carry the weight of their expectations, the burden of their unwavering belief in a narrative that had proven to be a beautiful, fragile illusion. The sun climbed higher, bathing the clearing in a golden glow. The forest, once a place of looming shadows and whispered warnings, now seemed to hum with a quiet, vibrant life. He inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and blossoming wildflowers filling his lungs. It was a scent of renewal, of possibility. He began to walk, not towards a grand destiny, not towards a shining city on a distant peak, but towards the winding path that led deeper into the forest. He wasn't leading anyone. He wasn't being followed. He was simply walking, a solitary figure amidst the ancient trees, a man reclaiming his own humanity. He felt a pang of loneliness, a familiar ache that had accompanied him for years, the isolation, the constant need to guard his thoughts. His actions, his very essence had taken a toll. He yearned for connection, for the simple comfort of shared laughter, an unspoken understanding. But he knew that true connection couldn't be forged through duty or prophecy. It had to be earned, nurtured, built on a foundation of genuine vulnerability and mutual respect. As he walked, he noticed a young sapling struggling to reach the sunlight beneath the dense canopy. Its leaves were pale, its stem thin and fragile. He knelt down and gently removed a layer of fallen leaves that were blocking its access to the light. The simple act, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things, filled him with a profound sense of peace. This was his purpose now. Not to save the world, but to nurture the seeds of hope that lay dormant within it. To offer a helping hand to those who struggled, to provide a moment of respite to those who were weary. To be a quiet presence, a gentle reminder that even in the darkest of times, life finds a way. He saw then the first signs of a small clearing ahead, an area where the forest seemed to thin, allowing more sunlight to filter through. He felt an inexplicable pull towards it, a sense of destiny that was entirely his own making. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The clearing revealed a small, dilapidated cottage nestled amongst a patch of wildflowers. It looked abandoned, forgotten, lost in the embrace of the forest. But there was something about it, a sense of quiet resilience that resonated with him. It was a place that had weathered the storms, endured the seasons, and yet still managed to retain a flicker of life. He approached the cottage cautiously, his senses on high alert. He didn't expect to find anything or anyone. But as he drew closer, he heard a faint melody drifting from within, a simple, melancholic tune played on a worn-out flute. He paused, listening intently. The music spoke of loss and longing, of hope and resilience. It was the music of the forest, the music of the human heart, and it felt familiar. He pushed open the creaking door of the cottage and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, filled with the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. An old woman sat by the hearth, her face etched with the wisdom of 1,000 years. Her eyes, though faded with age, shone with an uncanny brightness. She looked up as he entered, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her lips. "You've come," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "I've been expecting you." He didn't speak. He simply stood there, absorbing the serenity that emanated from her, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from the very walls of the cottage. "You are no longer the chosen one," she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "You have shed the burden of prophecy and embraced the freedom of being." He nodded a silent acknowledgement of her words. "But you are not without purpose," she continued. "You are a seed, a whisper, a reminder, and your journey has only just begun." She gestured towards a table laden with herbs and roots, scrolls, and ancient texts. "There is much to learn," she said, "much to share, and much to rebuild." He looked at the old woman, at the cottage, at the forest that surrounded them. He realized then that he wasn't being phased out. He was being reborn. The universe wasn't rejecting him. It was guiding him towards a new path, a path of quiet service, of humble wisdom, of enduring hope. He smiled a genuine smile that reached deep within his soul. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly, profoundly free. He wasn't the chosen one, and he didn't need to be. He was simply a man walking the path of his own making, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The rain had stopped, The sun was shining, and the world was waiting. The aroma of dried sage and something akin to distant starlight clung to the air, a palpable weight against the lingering sorrow that still clung to him, a spectral dampness refusing to completely evaporate. He traced the curve of a gnarled root on the table, its surface etched with the stories of centuries of seasons lived and lost, of silent witness to the slow, inevitable dance of creation and decay. The texts, bound in cracked leather and fastened with tarnished clasps, seemed to hum with a forgotten language, a resonance he felt in his bones more than he understood with his mind. He had been raised on grand pronouncements, on the deafening roar of expectation that followed every nascent ability, every burgeoning moment of power. To be released from that, it was like a limb he hadn't realized was shackled, suddenly released, leaving behind a phantom ache. The freedom she spoke of felt terrifying, a vast, echoing emptiness where the rigid structure of prophecy had once stood. He had known the claustrophobia of destiny, the suffocating certainty of a path laid out before him, a path not of his choosing, but decreed by something ancient and incomprehensible. It had been a cage gilded in purpose, a burden carried with a stoicism born of obligation. And now the cage was gone. But what remained? Was it liberation, or merely the terrifying exposure of a man stripped bare, vulnerable to the storms of the world? He looked at Alara, her face a tapestry of wrinkles that spoke of time and wisdom, her eyes pools of ancient starlight. He had questioned her silently, desperately. How could he, who had stood against the encroaching darkness, who had shouldered the weight of a world's hope simply? Deed. Was this a cruel jest, a cosmic betrayal? But her gaze held no malice, only a profound, unwavering gentleness. She had seen the weight he carried, the slow erosion of his spirit under the relentless pressure. She understood the need for release, even if he did not. He remembered the faces of the villagers, the fervent hope in their eyes, the whispered prayers offered in his name. He remembered the battles fought, the sacrifices made, the lives lost because of, or perhaps in spite of, his presence. To be no longer their shield, their champion. The guilt was a cold knot in his gut, a shadow clinging to his every breath. Had he failed